The early morning sun filtered through the massive windows of Chicago O'Hare International Airport as Dr. Keisha Bennett made her way through the busy terminal. Her heels clicked confidently against the polished floor, echoing the rhythm of a woman who had built an empire from nothing. At 38, she was the youngest black female CEO to ever lead a Fortune 500 technology company, and today she was flying to close the biggest deal of her career. Keisha adjusted her tailored blazer and checked her phone one more time. The merger with Global Tech Solutions would be worth $50 million and would change everything for her company, Infinity Systems. She had worked 16-hour days for months to make this happen. The presentation in her briefcase could revolutionize how small businesses used artificial intelligence, and she wasn't about to let anything go wrong. The first-class check-in area was less crowded than the rest of the airport. Keisha preferred it that way. She could focus on her final preparations without dealing with the chaos of economy boarding. She had earned this luxury through years of hard work and sacrifice. Every first-class ticket represented late nights, missed family dinners, and the constant pressure of proving herself in a world that often doubted her abilities. As she approached the counter, Keisha noticed a flight attendant with short blonde hair and a name tag that read, Patricia. The woman was checking in other passengers with professional smiles and friendly conversation. A middle-aged white man in front of her was chatting about his golf game, while Patricia laughed politely and efficiently processed his boarding pass. When it was Keisha's turn, she stepped forward with her usual confidence. Good morning. I'm checking in for Flight 1247 to Denver. Patricia looked up and something in her expression immediately changed. Her friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a look that Keisha had seen too many times before. It was the look of someone trying to figure out if she belonged where she was standing. Are you sure you're in the right place? Patricia asked, her voice suddenly cold and formal. Economy check-in is down that way. She pointed toward the far end of the terminal where long lines of passengers waited with their luggage. Keisha felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, but she kept her voice calm and professional. I have a first-class ticket. She pulled out her phone and showed the mobile boarding pass. Seat 2A. Patricia squinted at the screen like she was trying to read fine print in a dark room. She tilted her head and frowned. This doesn't look right to me. Where did you get this ticket? The question hit Keisha like a slap in the face. Where did she get it? She had purchased it herself, just like she purchased everything else in her life through her own hard work and success. But she knew that explaining this wouldn't make any difference to Patricia. I bought it through the airline's website, Keisha replied, her patience already wearing thin. Same as everyone else. Patricia's frown deepened. She called over to another flight attendant, a tall man with graying hair who was helping passengers nearby. Hey Daniel, can you come look at this? Something seems off about this ticket. Daniel walked over and both airline employees stared at Keisha's phone screen like they were examining evidence at a crime scene. Other passengers in line began to notice the delay. Some started checking their watches. Others whispered to each other about what was taking so long. Ma'am, we're going to need to see some additional identification, Daniel said, crossing his arms. And we'll need to verify this ticket with our system. Keisha reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license. She handed it to Patricia, who examined it with the same suspicious expression she had given the boarding pass. The irony wasn't lost on Keisha that her license clearly showed her address in one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods, but she knew that detail would probably be ignored. The name on the ID matches the ticket, Patricia admitted reluctantly. But I still think we should call this in. People try to use fake tickets all the time. Fake tickets? Keisha's voice remained steady, but inside she was boiling. You think I'm trying to sneak into first class with a fake ticket? Look, it's nothing personal, Daniel said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We just have to be careful. You understand? No, Keisha thought. She didn't understand. She didn't understand why a black woman with a valid ticket and proper identification needed to be treated like a criminal. She didn't understand why Patricia had processed 5 other passengers without question while she was being interrogated like she had committed a crime. The line behind her was getting longer, and Keisha could feel the stares of other passengers burning into her back. Some looked annoyed at the delay, others seemed curious about the drama unfolding at the counter. A few appeared sympathetic, but none of them spoke up. "I've been flying with this airline for 8 years, Keisha said, pulling out her phone again. "I'm a platinum member. My company spends over $2 million a year on business travel with your airline. Would you like to see my membership card as well?" Patricia barely glanced at the platinum status displayed on Keisha's phone. "Anyone can have a membership card," she said dismissively. "We still need to verify everything." The absurdity of the situation was becoming overwhelming. Here she was, a successful CEO who employed over 3,000 people, being treated like a suspected criminal because she dared to purchase a first-class ticket. Keisha thought about all the times she had been the only black person in boardrooms, all the times she had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition of her white colleagues. She thought about the little girl she used to be, dreaming of success while watching her mother clean office buildings at night to make ends meet. "Fine," Keisha said, her voice taking on the edge of authority that had intimidated competitors and impressed investors. "Make your calls. Verify whatever you need to verify, but I want to speak to your supervisor." Patricia's eyes flashed with irritation. "There's no need to get an attitude, ma'am. We're just doing our jobs." Just doing their jobs. Keisha had heard that excuse before, usually right before someone tried to put her in her place. But she wasn't the scared little girl from the South Side anymore. She was Dr. Keisha Bennett, and she had built her success by refusing to back down when people underestimated her. "Then do your job," she said firmly. "Process my ticket and let me board my flight." The tension at the counter was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other passengers were openly staring now, some recording with their phones. Keisha noticed a few business travelers in expensive suits shaking their heads in disgust, though she wasn't sure if their anger was directed at her or at the airline employees. Daniel picked up a phone and started dialing. "We're calling security," he announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Just to be safe." Security. The word hung in the air like a threat. Keisha felt her heart rate increase, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had dealt with worse situations than this, and she would handle this one too. She just had to remember who she was and what she had accomplished. As they waited for security to arrive, Keisha looked around at the other first-class passengers who had been processed without question. She wondered if any of them had ever been asked where they got their tickets or if their identification looked suspicious. She already knew the answer. The minutes felt like hours as Keisha stood at the counter, watching Patricia and Daniel whisper to each other while other passengers continued to board without any problems. A businessman in an expensive watch walked up, showed his ticket for less than 3 seconds, and was waved through with a cheerful, "Have a wonderful flight, sir." Keisha noticed everything. She noticed how Patricia's smile returned instantly for the white passengers. She noticed how Daniel made small talk about the weather and travel plans with everyone except her. She noticed the way they kept glancing back at her, like she was some kind of puzzle they couldn't solve. "Ma'am, we're still waiting for security to verify your information," Patricia said, not bothering to look up from her computer screen. "It shouldn't take much longer." "Verify what exactly?" Keisha asked, keeping her voice level despite the anger building inside her chest. "I've shown you my boarding pass, my ID, my membership status. What else do you need to see?" Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Look, between you and me, we get a lot of people trying to upgrade themselves or use tickets that don't belong to them. You seem nice enough, but we have to be careful. I'm sure you understand." Nice enough. The word stung more than any direct insult could have. Keisha understood exactly what he meant. She was acceptable to him as long as she stayed in her designated place, as long as she didn't reach too high or expect too much. But the moment she showed up in first class, she became suspicious. "Actually, I don't understand," Keisha replied, her CEO voice starting to emerge. "I don't understand why my ticket needs more verification than anyone else's. I don't understand why you assume I can't afford to be here." Patricia's head snapped up, her face flushing red. "Nobody said anything about what you can or can't afford. We're just following procedure. Whose procedure? Keisha challenged. Because I've been watching for the last 15 minutes, and you haven't followed this procedure with anyone else. The truth hung in the air between them like smoke. Oh, their passengers were definitely listening now. A woman in a Navy business suit shook her head in obvious disapproval, though Keisha couldn't tell if she was judging the situation or judging her for causing a scene. Daniel's phone rang, and he answered it with obvious relief. Yes, this is Daniel at Gate 12. We need someone to come verify a passenger's ticket. He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Well, she claims it's legitimate, but something doesn't seem right about it. Claims it's legitimate. Keisha felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had been through situations like this before, but it never got easier. Every time, she hoped things would be different. Every time, she was reminded that success and education couldn't protect her from other people's assumptions. Two security officers appeared at the counter, their heavy boots echoing against the floor. One was older with gray hair and tired eyes, the other younger with the eager expression of someone new to the job. The younger officer looked at Keisha and then at the airline employees. What seems to be the problem here? The older officer asked. Patricia immediately launched into her explanation. This passenger has a first-class ticket, but we're not sure it's legitimate. She's been giving us attitude when we try to verify her information. Giving them attitude. Keisha almost laughed. At the absurdity of it, she had remained calm and professional while being treated like a criminal, but somehow she was the one with an attitude problem. Ma'am, can I see your identification and boarding pass? The younger security officer asked. Keisha handed over her documents again, watching as he examined them with the same suspicious scrutiny as the airline employees. She wondered how many times she would have to prove she belonged in the space she had paid to occupy. Everything looks in order to me, the older officer said after glancing at her ID. What exactly is the issue? Daniel jumped in quickly. Well, it's just unusual. You know how it is. We have to be extra careful these days. Extra careful with whom, Keisha wanted to ask, but she held her tongue. She knew that any sign of anger or frustration would be used against her. She had learned long ago that black women weren't allowed to show emotion in these situations without being labeled as aggressive or difficult. The older security officer looked around at the other passengers boarding smoothly in the background, then back at Keisha. Something in his expression suggested he understood exactly what was happening, but he was caught between his job and what was right. Her ticket and ID are valid, he said firmly. There's no reason she can't board. Patricia's face went pale, then red again. But we still need to verify with corporate that the ticket wasn't stolen or purchased fraudulently. Based on what evidence? The officer asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Based on what evidence indeed? There was no evidence, and everyone knew it. There was only suspicion based on the color of Keisha's skin and the assumption that she couldn't possibly belong in first class. I want to speak to your manager, Keisha said quietly. Right now. Our manager is busy with other duties, Daniel replied quickly. We can handle this situation. No, you can't, Keisha said, her voice gaining strength. Because this situation is discrimination, and you're making it worse with every word that comes out of your mouth. The word discrimination seemed to echo through the boarding area. Other passengers stopped pretending they weren't listening. A few pulled out their phones, and Keisha could see camera lights starting to blink. Patricia's eyes widened with panic. Ma'am, there's no need to make accusations, we're just trying to do our jobs. Then do your jobs correctly, Keisha responded. Process my valid ticket and let me board my flight. The younger security officer stepped forward. Ma'am, maybe we can find you a nice seat in economy class. That would solve everyone's problem. A nice seat in economy class. As if the problem was simply where she was sitting and not the fundamental disrespect she was being shown. As if moving to the back of the plane would somehow make the discrimination acceptable. The only problem here, Keisha said clearly, is that your airline employees are refusing to honor a valid first-class ticket because they don't think I look like I belong in first class. A woman standing nearby gasped audibly. An older man, in the expensive suit, stepped out of line and walked over to the counter. "Excuse me," he said to Patricia, "but I couldn't help but notice that you processed my ticket in about 10 seconds, and this lady has been standing here for 20 minutes. What's the difference?" Patricia stammered. "Sir, this is a private matter between us and this passenger." "It's not private when it's happening in front of 50 people," the man replied. "And it's not right." More passengers began to murmur their agreement. Keisha felt a strange mix of gratitude and sadness that it took a white man speaking up for anyone to take notice of what was happening to her. The older security officer looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said to Keisha, "your documents are valid. You have every right to board this flight." "With respect, officer," Patricia interrupted, "we still have concerns about fraud." "What concerns?" Keisha asked, her patience finally running out. "That a black woman can afford a first-class ticket? That I might actually be successful enough to travel in comfort? What exactly concerns you about me sitting in the seat I paid for?" The questions cut through the pretense like a knife through paper. Everyone knew what this was really about, but saying it out loud made it impossible to ignore. The silence that followed Keisha's question was deafening. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, while Daniel looked around, desperately for someone to rescue him from the hole they had dug themselves into. The crowd of passengers had grown larger, and several people were now openly recording the confrontation with their phones. Keisha reached into her briefcase with deliberate calm. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but these people had left her no choice. Her fingers found the leather portfolio where she kept her business cards and important documents. If they wanted proof of who she was, she would give them more proof than they could handle. "Since you seem to have concerns about who I am," Keisha said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded boardrooms full of executives, "let me help you understand exactly who you're dealing with." She pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. The card was simple but elegant, with raised lettering that read, "Dr. Keisha Bennett, Chief Executive Officer, Infinity Systems." Patricia picked it up and squinted at it like it was written in a foreign language. "Anyone can print business cards," Daniel muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Keisha smiled for the first time since approaching the counter, though it wasn't a friendly smile. "You're absolutely right. Anyone can print business cards." She reached back into her briefcase and pulled out a magazine. But not everyone can be on the cover of Business Weekly magazine. She held up the current issue, where her own face stared. Back at them under the headline, "Tech Visionaries Under 40, the Leaders Changing Everything." Patricia's face went white as she looked from the magazine cover to Keisha and back again. "This month's Forbes has a nice article about me too," Keisha continued, pulling out another magazine. "Something about being one of the youngest black female CEOs in Fortune 500 history. Would you like to see that one as well?" The older security officer took the magazine and studied the cover carefully. His eyes widened as he read the headlines. "Ma'am, are you really the CEO of Infinity Systems?" "I am," Keisha replied simply. "The same Infinity Systems that just signed a $50 million contract with the Department of Defense. The same company that employs over 3,000 people and generates $2 billion in annual revenue." Daniel's face had gone from red to pale gray. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down on his position. "Well, how are we supposed to know that? You don't look like a typical CEO." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers gasped audibly. A teenage girl standing with her mother pointed at Daniel and said loudly, "Mom, did he just say what I think he said?" "Yes, honey," her mother replied, shaking her head in disgust. "He did." Keisha felt a familiar fire burning in her chest, the same fire that had driven her to build a billion-dollar company from a small office above a coffee shop. "What exactly does a typical CEO look like, Daniel?" Daniel realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take the words back. "I didn't mean, that's not what I—" "No, please explain it to me," Keisha pressed. "Paint me a picture of what a typical CEO looks like. I'm genuinely curious." The crowd was growing restless. More passengers had stopped to watch the confrontation, and the boarding process had essentially ground to a halt. A flight attendant from another gate had come over to see what was causing the commotion. Patricia tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, this has gotten way out of hand. Why don't we just get you seated and forget this whole thing happened? Forget it happened?" Keisha's voice rose slightly, though she maintained her composure. "You mean forget that you questioned my right to sit in a seat I paid for? Forget that you called security because you didn't think I looked like I belonged? In first class? Forget that you treated me like a criminal for having the audacity to be successful while black?" An older black woman who had been watching from nearby stepped forward. "Honey, I saw the whole thing," she said to Keisha. "These people should be ashamed of themselves." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Patricia said tersely. "I will not stay out of this," the woman replied firmly. "I'm 73 years old and I've seen this nonsense my entire life. I thought things were supposed to be better by now." More voices joined in. A young white man in a college sweatshirt said, "This is ridiculous. She's obviously legitimate. Just let her board." A businesswoman added, "I fly first class all the time, and nobody has ever questioned my ticket like this." The captain of the flight finally appeared, drawn by the growing crowd and delayed boarding. He was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, who looked like he had been flying planes since before Keisha was born. He surveyed the scene with the calm authority of someone who had dealt with every kind of crisis imaginable. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. Patricia and Daniel both started talking at once, their words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to explain their actions. The captain held up his hand for silence and turned to Keisha. "Ma'am, could you please tell me what happened?" Keisha appreciated his respectful tone and direct approach. "Captain, I approached the counter with a valid first-class ticket and proper identification. Your employees questioned the legitimacy of my ticket, called security, and suggested I take an economy seat instead. When I asked why I was being treated differently than other passengers, they told me they had to be extra careful, and that I didn't look like a typical CEO." The captain's expression darkened as he listened. He had spent 30 years with the airline and prided himself on treating every passenger with dignity and respect. This was exactly the kind of situation that gave the aviation industry a bad reputation. "May I see your ticket and identification?" he asked politely. Keisha handed over her documents, and the captain examined them quickly but thoroughly. "Everything appears to be in perfect order," he said, then turned to Patricia and Daniel. "Can either of you explain to me why this passenger was detained?" "We were just following security protocols," Patricia said weakly. "Which protocols exactly?" the captain asked. "Because in my 30 years with this airline, I've never seen these protocols applied to other first-class passengers." Daniel tried to jump in. "Sir, we were just being cautious. There's been a lot of fraud lately." "Show me the fraud alert for Lee." "This passenger," the captain said. "Show me the red flag in our system that indicated her ticket was suspicious." Both employees fell silent because there was no fraud alert, no red flag, no legitimate reason for their behavior. There was only prejudice and assumption disguised as professional procedure. The captain turned back to Keisha with genuine regret in his eyes. "Dr. Bennett, on behalf of our airline, I want to personally apologize for this inexcusable treatment. You are absolutely right that this would not have happened to other passengers, and that is completely unacceptable." Keisha appreciated the captain's honesty, but she knew an apology wasn't enough. "Captain, I appreciate your words, but this isn't just about me. How many other passengers have been treated this way? How many people have been humiliated and discriminated against by your staff?" The captain nodded gravely. "You're absolutely right. This is a systemic problem that requires immediate attention." He turned to address the crowd of passengers who had gathered. "I want everyone here to know that this behavior does not represent the values of our airline. We will be conducting a full investigation into this incident." A young man in the crowd called out, "Investigation? They just discriminated against her in front of 50 people. What more do you need to investigate?" The captain acknowledged the point with a nod. "You're right. The facts are clear. Dr. Bennett, would you please accompany me to first class? I'll personally ensure you're seated comfortably and will address this situation immediately." As they walked toward the boarding gate, Keisha could hear Patricia and Daniel whispering frantically behind them. She knew they were probably trying to figure out how to save their jobs, but it was too late for that. The damage was done, and it had been witnessed by dozens of people with cameras. As Captain Reynolds personally escorted Keisha to her first-class seat, she could feel the eyes of every passenger on the plane. Word had spread quickly through the cabin about what had happened at the gate. Some passengers looked at her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with the kind of respect reserved for someone who had just stood up to injustice and won. "Dr. Bennett, please accept my sincerest apologies," Captain Reynolds said as they reached seat 2A. "This should never have happened, and I want you to know that we take this matter very seriously." Keisha settled into her seat, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion that came after such an intense confrontation. "Captain, I appreciate your personal intervention, but I hope you understand that this isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of behavior that suggests your staff makes assumptions about passengers based on their appearance." The captain nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right, and I want you to know that this conversation doesn't end here." He pulled out his phone and began typing. "I'm sending a message right now to our corporate headquarters. They need to know what happened before we even take off." While the captain worked on his phone, Keisha noticed other passengers settling into their seats around her. The businessman, who had spoken up for her at the gate, stopped by her row. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I just wanted to say that what happened back there was completely unacceptable. I'm Richard Thompson, and I've been flying with this airline for 15 years. I've never seen anything like that." "Thank you for speaking up," Keisha replied. "It meant more than you know." "I have a daughter your age," Richard continued. "She's a doctor, and if someone treated her the way those employees treated you, I'd be furious. I just want you to know that not everyone thinks that behavior was okay." As Richard returned to his seat, Keisha pulled out her own phone. Her assistant Maya had been expecting an update about her arrival time, but now Keisha had much more to discuss. She sent a quick text. "Need to talk as soon as we're in the air. Major incident at airport. Document everything." The flight attendants working the first-class cabin were clearly aware of what had happened. They approached Keisha with extra care and attention, offering drinks and ensuring she was comfortable. It was obvious that word had traveled through. The crew and everyone was trying to make up for their colleagues' behavior. "Dr. Bennett," said Jennifer, the lead flight attendant for first class, "is there anything special we can do to make your flight more comfortable? We're all deeply sorry about what happened." "Just treat me like any other passenger," Keisha replied. "That's all I ever wanted." As the plane pushed back from the gate, Keisha watched through her window as ground crew members hurried around below. Somewhere in that terminal, Patricia and Daniel were probably having the worst day of their careers. She didn't take pleasure in their downfall, but she couldn't ignore the fact that their actions had consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Already saw the videos online. 3 passengers posted on social media. Story is spreading fast. Legal team is standing by. Videos online." Keisha hadn't even considered that the incident would make it to social media so quickly, but she realized she shouldn't be surprised. In today's world, discrimination couldn't hide in the shadows anymore. When people witnessed injustice, they documented it and shared it with the world. Captain Reynolds appeared at her seat again as they reached cruising altitude. "Dr. Bennett, I just got off the phone with our CEO. She's personally reviewing the footage from the security cameras at the gate, and she's asked me to get your contact information so she can speak with you directly." "The CEO wants to speak with me?" Keisha was surprised by how quickly the situation was escalating up the corporate chain. "Linda Morrison has been our CEO for 3 years, and she's made it very clear that discrimination has no place in our company. When she heard what happened, she immediately started an investigation." Keisha appreciated the quick response, but she had learned to be cautious about corporate promises. "Captain, I hope your CEO understands that this isn't just about punishing 2 employees. This is about examining why this happened and making sure it never happens again." "She does understand that," the captain assured her. "In fact, she mentioned that your company, Infinity Systems, is one of our largest corporate clients. She's very concerned about how this reflects on our airline's values." $2 million a year in business travel. Keisha had almost forgotten about that detail. But clearly the airline's leadership hadn't. Money had a way of making people pay attention to problems they might otherwise ignore. Her phone rang, and Keisha saw it was Maya calling. "Excuse me, Captain. I need to take this." "Dr. Bennett," Maya's voice was excited and concerned at the same time. "The story is everywhere. Airline discrimination is trending on Twitter. People are posting videos and demanding answers from the airline." Keisha felt a mix of emotions. Part of her was glad that the incident was getting attention, because it meant, their people understood that what happened was wrong. But another part of her felt exposed and vulnerable. She had always preferred to handle her business privately, but this situation had taken on a life of its own. "Maya, I need you to prepare a statement," Keisha said. "Something that addresses what happened but also talks about the bigger picture. This isn't just about me. It's about every person who gets treated differently because of how they look." "Already working on it," Maya replied efficiently. "Also, 3 news stations have called asking for interviews. And Dr. Williams from the NAACP wants to speak with you about using this as a catalyst for broader change in the travel industry." Broader change. That phrase stuck with Keisha as she ended the call. She had built her career by focusing on innovation and progress in technology. But maybe this incident was an opportunity to drive progress in an entirely different area. Jennifer approached with a tablet in her hand. "Dr. Bennett, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to show you something. Our crew has been discussing what happened, and we've decided to submit a formal complaint about Patricia and Daniel's behavior. What they did was wrong, and it doesn't represent who we are as flight attendants." Keisha looked at the tablet, which showed a letter signed by 6 members of the flight crew. They had written a detailed account of the discrimination they had witnessed, and formally requested that the airline take action to prevent similar incidents in the future. "Thank you," Keisha said, genuinely moved by their support. "This means a lot coming from people who work in this industry every day." "We see passengers from all walks of life," Jennifer explained. "Rich, poor, young, old, every race and nationality. You can imagine. The job requires us to treat everyone with respect and dignity. What happened today was the opposite of everything we're trained to do." As the flight continued, Keisha found herself in an unexpected position. What had started as a routine business trip had become a public incident that was sparking conversations about discrimination across social media. Her phone continued to buzz with messages from friends, colleagues, and even competitors who had seen the videos and wanted to express their support. The businessman, Richard, stopped by her seat again before the flight landed. "Dr. Bennett, I wanted you to know that I've already written to the airline's corporate office about what I witnessed. I've also shared the story with my business network. Sometimes change happens when enough people speak up." "Thank you, Richard. People like you make the difference between incidents like this being ignored and actually creating change." As the plane began its descent toward Denver, Keisha realized that her day was far from over. The meeting she had flown to attend was still important, but now she had a much bigger opportunity in front of her. She could use this incident to shine a light on discrimination in the travel industry and push for real, lasting change. Her phone buzzed one more time with a text from an unknown number. "Dr. Bennett, this is Linda Morrison, CEO of the airline. I've seen the footage. We need to talk immediately. This is unacceptable, and we're going to make it right." The plane touched down in Denver exactly on schedule, but everything else about Keisha's day had changed completely. As passengers began gathering their belongings, her phone rang with a call from the number that had texted her during the flight. "Dr. Bennett, this is Linda Morrison. I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about what happened this morning." Keisha appreciated that the CEO had called personally, but she had learned to judge people by their actions, not their words. "Ms. Morrison, I appreciate you reaching out. What exactly are you planning to do about this situation?" "I've already taken action," Linda replied without hesitation. "Patricia and Daniel have been terminated, effective immediately. Their behavior was completely unacceptable and goes against everything our company stands for." Terminated. The word hit Keisha harder than she expected. She had known this was likely to happen, but hearing it made everything feel very real. Two people had just lost their jobs because they couldn't see past the color of her skin. Ms. Morrison, while I appreciate that you're taking this seriously, firing two employees isn't going to solve the bigger problem here. You're absolutely right, Linda agreed. That's just the beginning. I want to fly to Denver to meet with you in person. We need to talk about how to make sure this never happens again to anyone. Keisha checked her watch. Her original meeting was scheduled to start in 3 hours, but given everything that had happened, she wondered if she should postpone it. Then again, maybe today was exactly the right day to close the biggest deal of her career. Maybe facing discrimination and fighting back had reminded her of just how strong she really was. I can meet with you this afternoon, Keisha said. But I want you to understand that this conversation needs to lead to real change, not just public relations. Agreed completely. I'll be there by 4 o'clock. As Keisha gathered her briefcase and prepared to leave the plane, Captain Reynolds appeared one last time. Dr. Bennett, I just wanted to say that in 30 years of flying, I've never been more ashamed of my company's employees. But I've also never been more impressed by a passenger's grace under pressure. Thank you, Captain. Your intervention made all the difference. Walking through the Denver airport felt surreal. Keisha's phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages. The story had spread far beyond social media. News outlets were picking it up, and several civil rights organizations had reached out to offer their support. Maya had texted her a link to a news article with the headline, "Tech CEO Faces Discrimination on Flight, Airline Responds Swiftly." The article included quotes from passengers who had witnessed the incident and praised Keisha for handling the situation with dignity. But the most surprising message came from her biggest business rival, David Chen, CEO of Tech Global Industries. Keisha saw the news. What happened was inexcusable. You handled it perfectly. Call me if you need anything. Even her competitors understood that what had happened was bigger than business rivalry. It was about basic human dignity and respect. The ride to her hotel gave Keisha time to think about everything that had occurred. This morning she had been focused entirely on her business meeting and the $50 million deal. Now she found herself at the center of a national conversation about discrimination in the travel industry. Her phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Williams from the NAACP. Dr. Bennett, I've been following your story all day. What happened to you happens to countless travelers every year, but most of them don't have your platform or resources to fight back. Would you consider working with us to push for industry-wide changes? Keisha thought about all the times she had been the only black person in a boardroom, all the times she had been underestimated because of her race and gender. Dr. Williams, I've spent my career trying to change the technology industry. Maybe it's time to help change something else too. By the time Keisha reached her hotel, she had made a decision. The business meeting was still important, but this incident had given her an opportunity to make a difference beyond just her own company. She called her assistant Maya. Maya, I want you to set up a press conference for tomorrow morning. I'm going to make a statement about what happened and announce some initiatives to address discrimination in business travel. That's a great idea, Maya replied. I've already been contacted by journalists from major newspapers and television networks. They all want to hear your side of the story. This isn't about my side of the story, Keisha clarified. This is about making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other people. The business meeting that afternoon went better than Keisha could have imagined. The executives from Global Tech Solutions had seen the news coverage and instead of being concerned about controversy, they were impressed by how she had handled herself under pressure. Dr. Bennett, said the lead negotiator, the way you conducted yourself today shows exactly the kind of leadership and character we want to partner with. Let's finalize this deal. $50 million. The contract that would transform her company was signed before dinner time, but somehow it didn't feel like the most important thing that had happened that day. Linda Morrison arrived at Keisha's hotel exactly at 4 o'clock, accompanied by the airline's head of human resources and their chief diversity officer. The CEO was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and determined eyes, who clearly took the situation very seriously. Dr. Bennett, I want to start by saying that what happened this morning represents a complete failure on our part. Not just By 2 employees, but by our systems and training. I appreciate your honesty, Keisha replied. What are you going to do differently? Linda pulled out a tablet and began outlining their action plan. First, we're implementing mandatory bias training for all customer-facing employees. Second, we're creating a new position, Chief Equality Officer, to oversee all aspects of customer treatment. Third, we're establishing a partnership with civil rights organizations to audit our procedures regularly. Those are good first steps, Keisha acknowledged. But I want to propose something bigger. She outlined her vision for an industry-wide initiative to address discrimination in business travel. Airlines, hotels, and rental car companies would work together to establish common standards and training programs. There would be regular audits and public reporting on how companies were treating customers from different backgrounds. We'll fund the research and provide the technology platform, Keisha offered. But we need major industry players like your airline to commit publicly to participating. Linda didn't hesitate. We're in. Whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again. That evening, Keisha sat in her hotel room reflecting on one of the most challenging days of her career. She had faced discrimination, fought back with dignity, closed the biggest deal in her company's history, and launched an initiative that could change an entire industry. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Saw the news, baby. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and for others. That's how change happens. Change. That word had followed Keisha throughout the day. She had built her career on the idea that technology could change the world for the better. Now she realized that sometimes the most important changes happened when people simply refused to accept being treated as less than equal. The press conference the next morning was covered by news outlets across the country. Keisha announced the launch of the Equality in Travel Initiative, a partnership between her company, the airline, and several civil rights organizations. The goal was simple: ensure that every traveler, regardless of race, gender, or background, would be treated with dignity and respect. 6 months later, the initiative had expanded to include over 50 companies in the travel industry. Patricia and Daniel's discriminatory actions had inadvertently sparked a movement that was making travel more equitable for millions of people. Keisha often thought about that morning at Chicago O'Hare. What had started as the worst kind of discrimination had become a catalyst for positive change. Sometimes, she realized, the most important victories came from refusing to be silenced in the face of injustice.